Hey, I'm Scott.
And I'm Chris.
And this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
All right, let's jump in. The first question reads like this. How should we view the Asbury revival and other so-called revivals popping up on college campuses?
Well, that's a probably spicy question, depending on how much you know and how strongly you think about what happened at Asbury, which is a undergraduate university in Kentucky, right? I think the city of Asbury. I don't know a whole lot about the college. I know broadly, and Scott, please, add in, or Bree too, of course, any details here. But it's a more Wesleyan, Methodist, okay, with kind of some roots in revivals.
They've had seven in the last 100 years.
About 7 revivals in the last 100 years. And this one broke out spontaneously, as opposed to, it wasn't like,
they were planning to have one.
Scripted, come for revival. It was not that, which we can appreciate that part of it, I think,
definitely.
Right away. And it was said to be in a chapel that a speaker, like a...
I listened to it.
Okay, did you?
Yeah, I listened to the message.
Tee us up for where...
It was out of Romans 12.
Okay.
They've been going through Romans for all I could understand about it, and it was really about love. Understanding God's love, understanding how we should love one another in light of that, and understanding kind of false pictures of love that our culture sort of gives, and he kind of capitalized on that. Some will mention that he didn't really... It wasn't like overtly unbiblical or anything like that, but some will say that he didn't have the gospel in it, and that's a concern to some people, right? Because how is revival breaking out without the gospel being preached explicitly, those kind of things, and yet you can tell, though, to your point, there was not any expectation that he was trying to stir up anything. He was just simply preaching his next message to the chapel service.
But as it goes, worship and prayer broke out and just continued and continued.
It lasted for over 2 weeks.
Built up.
Yeah,
24 hours a day.
Nonstop.
Yeah.
Lines out the door.
People
thousands of people traveling miles and miles upon miles, flying in from other countries.
Right. Wow.
Right. So it was a big deal, and I would argue, at least in my recollection, really the first of its kind in this era of social media, where it was fanned into flame through videos and then hashtags and all of this about Asbury Revival. And I mean, it didn't take 48 hours for this to become a thing, and then for the hot takes to get started, right? As far as like, is it legitimate? You've got the no camp and the like, how could you ever question it camp, right? So some people were just throwing all kinds of cold water on this thing. Oh, it's awful for these reasons, that reasons. You've got the whether he's a heretic or just somewhere along that spectrum, Todd Bentley, who's got a checkered past to say the least. He went and visited and absolutely loved it, which really is a part of the red flag in terms of like, you've got a guy like that loving it. You've got some pretty wacky stuff on video, at least outside of the chapel, but then you've got some very sweet moments on video that you just see what seems just genuine, constant worship. It's simple. It's not staged. And it was fascinating to see it unfold.
It moved to other campuses, as the question was asking about, right?
Lee
and,
University.
Lee University.
Samford.
Samford.
Is that right?
I don't know. That could be true. I know Concordia was one. They got interviewed on Fox News, and they had an individual, a student from Concordia. I'm sorry, not Concordia, Cedarville. Cedarville.
Okay.
In Ohio. And man, she, I don't think they were trying to stir anything up at Cedarville. And she had a very robust, clear gospel understanding and expression on. I mean, it was really impressive. I was encouraged by her. But I think it led several campuses into different responses in light of what was going on in Asbury. And so I think those differ depending on the campus. I think it differs, to your point, depending on the theological background and sort of the revivalist underpinnings and certain, like you said, in the Wesleyan Methodist kind of roots of Asbury, for example, and how that differs per college campus that it expanded out to.
Right.
But how should we be thinking about this?
Yeah.
How should we be? I think, first of all, we... it would be wise to withhold our judgments for some time. I think of George Whitfield going back to the First Great Awakening, which is arguably the greatest awakening revival that has taken place on American soil since, ever, right? This was even before. So But he would say, when people would come up to him and be like, man, this is amazing. Well, look at what God's doing. All these people got saved, blah, blah, blah. And his response would be, allegedly. And not in a negative sense. Like, let's believe God for what we see, and let's also be mindful of the fruit it produces. And Jonathan Edwards, writing on this, was really helpful as well to distinguish between what we would call, don't be confused, not works of the Spirit, and here are clear demonstrations of a true work of the Spirit. And the truth is, in revivals, even historically, you're going to have a little bit of both.
It can be messy.
It can be messy in there. And as a result, unclear for some time. So I think to withhold judgment is helpful. I even like what Edward says, and I've actually pulled up a quote with a kind of a warning to those passing judgment from the sidelines. And here's what he says. He says, "Let us all be hence warned, by no means to oppose or do anything in the least to clog or hinder that work that has lately been carried on in the land, but on the contrary, to do our utmost to promote it. Now that Christ has come down from heaven into this land in a remarkable and wonderful work of his Spirit, it becomes all his professed disciples to acknowledge him and give him honor," end quote. So I think the disposition is, let's not just be curmudgeon, automatically pushing it away.
Especially the whole thing.
Yes.
It has to, because there are some concerning bits and pieces and videos that are concerning. Let's not dismiss the whole thing.
And and at the same time, let's not just be carried away by, some of these signs that Edwards would say were not necessarily judges of a true work of the Spirit. Unusual, extraordinary activity, producing bodily or emotional effects, great impressions made on imaginations, on and on. He has actually a list of things that he talks about, and they're helpful just to kind of work through this. We did a podcast on this. We've mentioned this several times, even within this season with the Asbury stuff, but revival and revivalism is a history of the first and second great awakening and the distinctions between the two of them. And it's really, really insightful, written by an excellent biographer by the name of Ian Murray, that I would highly recommend, especially because revival, who doesn't want revival? Right? Revival's a blessing. One of my favorite preachers from the past is Martin Lloyd-Jones. He was big on revival. You want to see revival? You want to see people get saved. You want to see it happen in a way
work
that
of the Lord.
Yes, please. And yes,
absolutely.
Go Lord, and all of that stuff. And yet it's not wrong to be cautious. And I think there has to be a way of, let's believe the best, and let's believe believingly that the Lord is that we would love to see that work get done, but let's make sure we're also cautioning and saying, what are the signs that we're seeing? Is there, when you read Ian Murray's book, you've got contrition, repentance, tears of sorrow over sin,
clear gospel preaching, a response to Jesus Christ, elevating Christ in their eyes. You've got this fighting sin and this greater regard for the word, and on and on you could kind of go with that. I would add, if I may, the idea of what the impact in the church and local churches will be long term. A revival on a college campus is an interesting, not an experiment, but just thing to witness, because these are young kids for the most part. Now, people of all ages were coming, but
eventually, right?
How does this benefit, whether that's going to be church planting someday, to your point about waiting and seeing, people getting more connected to good local churches and not just experiencing this on a college campus without anywhere to go from there,
Right.
that carries them into their further adult years, hopefully the rest of their life, faithfully living in local churches and serving the body there. And that's just, we will never know the full impact of that side of things.
Yeah.
But you want a true revival to end up with that benefit too.
Do people describe revivals beyond just lost being saved? Is it kind of like I don't know what other word to use besides refreshing someone who's already a Christian and perhaps they've just not been walking faithfully?
Yeah. I think it's typically described as an extraordinary work of the Holy Spirit through the ordinary means of grace is what a revival really means or looks like. And so the Spirit is always working through the means of grace, but revival is an extraordinary work of the Spirit through the same means of grace. And so that's another piece to what Chris is saying of like, hey, let's make sure the means of grace are evident and exercised, and therefore we have greater confidence that what is behind this transformative work, whether to ignite the heart of a sleeping Christian, lukewarm Christian, whatever that would be, or it is to save someone who is not a believer, or maybe a Christian who thinks they're a believer and is confronted with the fact that they're not a believer. I think all of that's on the table in terms of what it looks like for that to take place. But to your point, Chris, even saying not happening in the local church, one of my questions would be, let's see the impact in the local church. So of all these people that are converging, are we going to see them now adding to the church? Are we going to see them disseminating into local bodies and being accounted for in, give it some time, let's go with 2 years, something like that.
Yeah, that's good. Mark your calendars. Let's talk about this again.
Come back in 2 years.
Do some research. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.